You are live. That's what it just told me right now. It just told me that you are live.
Yep.
Hey, everybody.
Who are you?
We are coming together today to discuss a book. The name of the book is called Days of Rage. It also has a subtitle that escapes my mind, but I'm going to look that up right now, as well as the name of the author.
Something like something to do with the history, FBI, and I forget the rest of the subtitle.
So Days of Rage, America's Radical Underground, the FBI, and the Forgotten Age of Revolutionary Violence.
There you go.
And yeah, it does seem that this is a forgotten age. This is not something you really hear being brought up at all in modern political discourse, which is pretty interesting. Like, this is not even stuff that Fox News talks about. So I'm kind of surprised.
Yeah, that's a good point, because like most of the time nowadays, it seems like political violence skews much more heavily right wing. Like in all the mass shooters seem to be right wing, and then of course there was the Trump supporters storming the Capitol last year on January 6th, and of course there were those BLM riots after George Floyd's murder last year. But other than that, most of the political violence seems to be right wing for the most part nowadays.
Yeah, it does seem so, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So one of the things that this book basically covers is left-wing violence, I would say starting from the late 60s to like the early 80s. And left-wing violence, one of the most, probably, I would say the most consistent thing that goes among all of these radical groups is, like, in their downtime, they were always studying Marxist literature, it seems like.
Yeah. That's why like I bet that's one of the reasons why conservatives get all paranoid if someone calls themselves a Marxist or a socialist, and they assume that means that you're like a violent revolutionary, like literally a Maoist or a Stalinist or something like that.
Yeah, there were some groups that really praised Mao.
Yeah.
So there were a number of different groups. I think one of the most prominent groups that they covered was the Weathermen, um, which is a splinter group of SDS. Now, I have an interesting story to tell about this. About 10 years or so ago, I worked as a security guard at a biotech company. And one of the techs that he was like a maintenance tech guy, and he had confessed to me that he was a part of SDS, which was the kind of the group that originated a lot of these college, like, academic radical students. After he told me this, like, he told me like a bunch of stories about, like, the adventures, I guess he did. He never mentioned like bombings or anything, because I don't think he was part of the Weather Underground. But he did talk about Bill Ayers and like some of the notable people who were part of that movement before they splintered off into the Weather Underground.
I thought that was an interesting aspect of the book, how it seemed to be kind of a common thing that there would be infighting and division within these radical groups, and they would splinter off into different groups because I guess because they were so radical.
Yeah, and I was so interested in this story when I was in college, and I had him come to my American history class to give a lecture to
Oh, cool.
some of our students. basically just had him tell like the stories and stuff about when he was in SDS and all of that, and had people asking questions and whatnot. So yeah, that was an interesting um, foray into this era. Uh, so what did you think about, like, they were obviously very left, but one of the things I thought was also interesting was how they were very liberal when it came to like sexual views and drug use.
Yeah, yeah. I remember there's one part in particular when they were talking about how you're allowed to use alcohol and weed in moderation, but no so-called harder drugs. They I guess they assumed that it would make you incoherent and unreliable or something like that, which is
Yeah, like
interesting because it kind of
heroin and
seems like with radical, especially radical left-wing groups, you assume there's, especially in the 60s and 70s too, you would assume there's this sort of like free love hippie mindset where, hey, let's take psychedelics and hard drugs are okay too, but it's kind of ironically puritanical in a way for them to uh, just encourage moderation in drug use and only using the so-called softer drugs. It seems like kind of more of a liberal perspective, as you said.
yeah, one of the things that was interesting too is that the sexual dynamics in a lot of these groups ended up getting these groups in trouble and causing internal conflicts. Like, even though a lot of these groups did practice, I guess, I don't know if that you want to call it polyamory or orgies and whatnot, but these
Yeah,
often
they
cause
it is it
interpersonal
is
conflicts.
it is mentioned, I think, at least once that I forget which group, but at least one of them were having orgies that as a way to bond the group together.
Yeah, a number of different groups kind of practiced in this shared sexual experience. If it wasn't orgies, it was kind of like a polyamory situation where they would hook up with each other and not be in monogamous relationships with each other.
Hmm.
So the politics that they were pushing, which is interesting because there are a lot of parallels um, to today's politics, especially when it comes to the uh, the plight of the African American. So one of the things about this SDS and Weatherman group is that one of their exclusive goals was to free Black people from oppression, which is pretty interesting considering that this group was, I think they were entirely like white, like middle upper class, like academic type of folks that were in this movement.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because it seems like a lot of people who are in Black Lives Matter and Antifa and stuff like that seem to be like wealthy or middle class white people.
Yeah, so they were all what you would expect, radical students. We know during contemporary times what radical students look like and kind of the havoc they've kind of caused. Um, not even close to as bad as what was going on in the 70s. Like the
Hmm.
70s, you just had bombings and bombings and bombings and bombings.
Yeah,
Um,
and like endless cop killings and stuff like that too.
yeah, so SDS, fortunately, they were very conscious they were trying to be conscious about sparing human lives. That wasn't always the case, but they didn't try to wantonly kill people. I think most of their bombings, they would call out warnings and they would try to make sure to bomb at particular times of day. So I know a lot of their bombings were geared towards, um, I would say, I guess it structures that they would find oppressive, like police buildings and banks and um, like government buildings and stuff like that. And they bombed a lot of shit, man.
Yeah. Yeah,
But there was,
definitely.
yeah, there was a big turning point with the Weathermen. I think one of their bomb makers accidentally exploded in their safe house. And in the books, there's like a really graphic description of kind of that first bombing that went off accidentally. They call it like the townhouse or something like that. Where I think three of the Weathermen died in this when a bomb accidentally went off.
Right.
So after that, they kind of cooled off for a while and laid low. But it was really interesting how there was different elements. So you had the going underground, which meant like you're using fake IDs and aliases, and you're like living not necessarily off the grid, but you're doing things in a very like a very sneaky way. Like you're not. It's like you're living like the life of a spy, almost.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you have to like conceal your identity, and there's a lot of stuff about people in those groups moving back and forth between different places and hiding from cops and having to change their cars and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And the Weather Underground is not the only group that they talk about. There are some other groups. I think one of them was the Black Panthers. They did a little bit of overview about them and their evolution and how they kind of splintered off too into two separate groups.
Yeah, one of them, I think the even more radical and violent wing of the Black Panthers that's mentioned a lot in the book is the Black Liberation Army, right?
Right, the BLA.
Yeah.
And they were all the more radical elements. Their kind of sole purpose was to kill cops.
Mm-hmm.
And they did a lot of that. So when people talk about the Black Panthers, they kind of do have this tainted history where they have this splinter group that disagreed with the Panther leadership and just went off on their own to kill police. I know the one leader, because it was two leaders, and then they splintered off. One of the leaders, I think, was killed, and because the leader on the good side, I'd say the nonviolent side, the protection side, was Huey Newton. He was one of the major leaders there. And I think it was on the other side, like the other Panther side, they were all taking up like African names and wearing like dashikis and stuff.
Yeah.
And getting like really radical about their ideas and really violent about dealing with cops. And then there's like some other Black revolutionary groups. I know there was the Symbionese Liberation Army or something like that.
Yeah.
That's the one that had kidnapped Patty Hearst.
Right. Yeah. And there was that reminds me, there was also, I forget the details, but there was something to do with Charles Manson's cult, wasn't there?
Well, they didn't talk about Charles Manson's cult particularly in this book.
They talked about Sharon Tate, was it?
I don't remember them bringing up Sharon Tate.
I seem to remember something like that. Maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah, was she part of any of these left-wing groups?
I think I don't remember the details, but it was something like I think it was something like they were targeting her at some point, and or that people in Charles Manson's cult had some sort of sympathy for these violent groups. I don't remember the details exactly.
Yeah, I don't remember them talking much about that. There was quite a lot of talk about Patty Hearst, who was related to one of Joe Rogan's nemesis, um, who's William Randolph Hearst.
Oh, okay. That's why your name was familiar. Okay.
Yeah, is that one of Joe Rogan's nemesis?
Yeah, yeah. That's one of his part of his spiel about the demonization of weed, about how William Randolph Hearst owned a newspaper and published a bunch of propaganda about how black and Mexican people were smoking marijuana and then raping white women and that kind of stuff. And there was an article that was going to come out in Time magazine called Hemp, the $1 billion crop, and he wanted to suppress that because he owned newspaper companies, and he like it would disrupt the production process with how the paper is made. So those were ways in which he spread propaganda against both cannabis and hemp.
Yeah, and then Patty Hearst was William Randolph Hearst's granddaughter.
Okay.
So yeah, they kidnapped her for ransom, and they did a few things that were kind of noble, but kidnapping somebody for ransom is pretty harsh. I know one of their demands was like to feed the city or something like that, um, which wasn't like completely possible for even for somebody of William Randolph Hearst means. I don't know. Yeah, I wonder if he was still alive back then during the kidnapping. Let me take a look. Well, he died in 51, so no, he wasn't alive, but I'm sure the dad was probably running the business. I'm not sure, but she was definitely rich and came from a rich family.
Right.
Um, so they kidnapped her, and I think I don't know. It's hard to say. I kind of feel that there was um, some because they kind of talked about her. She tried to talk about her capture in a first person way, and I don't know. I kind of have doubts about how she described her experience.
Oh, interesting. How so?
It seems like she had that like what's that disorder where you start to empathize with your kidnappers?
Oh, Stockholm syndrome?
Yeah, I think she probably had some of that, but she was saying like, "Oh, I only did it for survival and blah 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 blah." But I have doubts because like in her last interactions before she got caught, she was like shooting at people, so without
Right.
remorse. So I was like, yeah, yeah, right. Um, I know one of the ways she got initiated into the group was they kind of had like their way with her.
Right.
Um, and from what she said, she didn't really like resist it, but um, she wasn't like it was like almost rape at that point.
Yeah.
But after they had sex with her, she agreed to join them. Um, and when she got caught by the cops, she said that her profession was a revolutionary, like an urban revolutionary or urban guerrilla. Like
Right.
she was definitely into that shit. It wasn't like she didn't really try to escape or anything. So
Yeah.
it's such a strange story surrounding this woman.
Yeah, it's true.
But yeah, she was kidnapped in 1974, and she was running with the Symbionese army, I think, for a couple of years. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, she was on the. I think she actually it was just 1 year. It was 1 year later when she got captured. She got arrested.
Okay.
But when she was arrested, she was claiming like brainwashing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if she did have some sort of something like Stockholm syndrome, then that was kind of brainwashing.
Yeah, that's true. But
But
yeah,
you don't know whether she just used that as an excuse too, I guess.
I have no idea. It's such a weird thing just to think about. You know what I mean? Like, I can't think of someone that gets captured to be willing to completely assimilate into that group. You know, it just seems weird to me.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, the Symbionese army. So also, we got to learn about Tupac's parents.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, so Tupac's parents were like revolutionaries. I guess his mom is still on the run.
Right.
She has been evading capture. I guess she's in Cuba or something.
That's interesting too because I don't actually know that much about Tupac's political views, but I mean there was at one point in the later part of his career he was kind of like trying to emulate Machiavelli, which is definitely not a left-wing guy. He's more of a it's hard to classify him politically, but he's probably much closer to being right-wing than left-wing because he's talking about that the Machiavelli's famous book, The Prince. It's all about how to politically manipulate people, basically.
Mm. Oh, okay. So what I found out is she's not alive. She died in 2006. I'm
Oh,
sorry,
okay.
2016.
Oh, okay.
So less than a decade ago. But yeah, she was part of these revolutionary groups. Um, I'm trying to think if I got the right person here.
For what?
No, I got the wrong person. Um, she is okay. The one that they talk about is Asada Shakur,
Okay.
and Asada Shakur is related to Tupac. I think it's his
Oh,
aunt.
okay. Oh, okay. Oh, so not his mom.
No, not his mom, his aunt.
Okay.
And she was in the BLA, which are the radical offshoot of the Panthers
Right.
who wanted to kill cops.
Right.
One thing, yeah, there were a lot of descriptions of shootouts in this book.
Yeah.
Shootouts,
A lot.
robberies. Like it's a pretty wild book.
Yeah, bank robberies. I forgot that was another main aspect of what was going on.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about these radical left-wing groups is many of them funded themselves by robbing banks, at least not the Weathermen, like the other radical groups, the ones that were more into killing people.
Hmm.
But many of these groups were basically became expert bank robbers,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they had knocked off dozens of banks, lots of different armored cars. That's how they funded their revolution, basically. I think the Weathermen, since they had access to more of the upper crust, they actually were funded by donations from radical like lawyers and professors and stuff like that.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of bank robbery in this
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. There was one point where one of them was talking about how they wanted to emulate this famous bank robber in Europe who said that he never stayed in a bank for more than 5 minutes at a time. So they got really efficient at it. And I remember this one part in the book too, where there was an off duty cop there when the bank was being robbed, and he was driving his wife's car rather than his, so he didn't have his gun in the glove box, so he got into a shootout with whichever group it was when they were robbing that bank, and
Mm,
he forgot like at the last second.
okay. All right, so I got some more info. Asada Shakur and Tupac are blood relatives.
They are?
Appar- they're not.
They're
Apparently,
not? Okay.
Asada Shakur is his godmother.
Oh, okay.
Um,
So
but yeah,
I was wondering then was Shakur his real last name?
well, when they became radicals, his parents gonna change their names
Okay.
because I believe in the BLA, all of them had changed their names to like African sounding names.
Oh, okay.
So he was born with that name. He wasn't his name wasn't changed after the fact.
Okay.
Because his parents were in the Black Panthers, and Asada Shakur was in the Black Liberation Army, but she was a former Black Panther.
Okay.
One
So
of the
she
other
got
interesting things about this book are the freaking prison breaks, man.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
They broke the Weathermen broke uh, Leary out of jail. Which is like one of the major drug dudes from the 70s.
Mhm. Yeah, it was like a huge leader in the hippie movement and psychedelics, which I think is that was a really interesting part of the book for sure. Like you would think it's surprising that such a hippie they would be such a fan of such a hippie guy who seemed to be like not violent at all and all about the typical free love and all that kind of stuff.
So he was broken out of jail by the Weathermen. Um, and one of the interesting thing about a lot of these radical groups is that they were able to form international groups by um, a lot of them would base themselves in Algiers, which were very sympathetic to radical left wing activities.
Hmm.
So many of the headquarters were based in Algiers because many of the leaders of these groups were criminals, at least in the United States. So they kind of whenever they needed to get out of the United States, that's where they would go. And I believe that's where Timothy Leary ended up going after he got broken out of jail.
Right. Why was Timothy Leary in jail again? I don't remember.
Um, it's a good question. It's probably drug charge related, but I can look that up. And I'm guessing it has to do with drugs.
Yeah,
Timothy
that was
Leary. Yeah, he was smuggled out of prison by. But what was he in prison for? Timothy Leary. Yeah, it was some drug charges. He was convicted and sentenced to 6 months
Okay.
on marijuana possession.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, he was in prison on possession charges.
Man, it's crazy.
He broken out of jail. Yeah, there are a lot of jailbreaks. One of the most amazing jailbreaks is they broke out a dude with no hands.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
This guy, the reason he had no hands is because he had an accident making a bomb.
Right.
So his hands, I think there only one finger was left on his hands or something.
It
Like
seems
it
like
blew off
their
9 of his fingers.
it seems like their bombings were kind of inefficient along a lot of the times, and they went off and didn't hurt anyone, or were improperly made or something like that.
Yeah, there were times where they would be duds. I know one of their bomb makers got really, really good at the bombs.
Hmm. Yeah,
He was one
eventually.
of the more effective bombers. But a lot of the early bombers, they didn't really have an effective way of making these bombs. So there were a couple of complications that happened. So you have dynamite, which degrades pretty quickly. And when dynamite degrades, it becomes unstable.
Oh, so
So,
that's true. That's true what they say in movies.
yeah, if you see dynamite with beads of sweat on it, you want to get as far away from that as possible.
Right.
Because they ended up getting their hands on dynamite by either buying it outright or stealing it from quarries. And they had so much dynamite that I think there was a single year, like the amount of bombings that happened were basically one every day.
Yeah, it's a hell of a lot.
Yeah, so they're not the only groups. I know there was another group of called the FLA or what
Oh
was the?
yeah,
It was a Puerto Rican group.
right.
Um, uh, and they were said to be the most deadly when it came to making suicide bombs, or not suicide bombs, but just bombs in general. Like they didn't care about loss of life, so they put it anywhere, put their bombs anywhere and everywhere. Um, and yeah, they were bombing it up. Um, and they were also a radical group. So they wanted to make sure to be independent from the United States. And well, there was a lot. The book didn't focus too much on this group, but it does show that this, there were people in this group who had assisted other groups. So these groups, especially the ones that are for violent revolution, they often had contacts with other groups that had other motives. I remember there was this one part of the book where the Weathermen were trying to make a comeback and they got all of these groups together and in true leftist fashion, like it became a oppression Olympics um, that completely destroyed it, them able to come together to be able to do something. Like I think one of the groups was like, "Oh, you're not doing enough about women's rights," and then one of the other like radical groups is, "Oh, you're not doing enough about the African American struggle." So it became so that they couldn't really. It was like herding cats. They couldn't get all these groups together to do any type of cohesive collective action. Um, and it seems like they were mostly acting self-interested and not, and they weren't able to coalesce as a larger entity. But what did you think about the like the outcomes of some of these people, especially the ones in the Weather Underground that ended up being like professors and shit and lawyers. Like some of them that obviously like got a slap on the wrist for the shit that they did in the 70s.
Yeah, that's surprising that they kind of like got tamed and just became professors and stopped being violent revolutionaries like that. Yeah, I found that surprising that that happened with so many of them seemingly.
Yes. Well, I think the underground got off a lot because they really didn't kill people. It's just like destruction of property. The BLA people, though, lots of them got lots of hard time in prison. I think
Yeah,
most of them got really hard time in prison.
yeah,
Um,
they were some of the most violent ones, right?
mhm. And I don't remember what the other group, like there was this one other very small group at the end that consisted of um like it was like three families with kids and they had extreme difficulty keeping staying underground. I think it was like some detective work that finally got them captured. Um, but it was really interesting how these people stayed off the radar with their different identities and whatnot. But
For
one of
sure.
the things I thought was interesting too is that a lot of these groups were motivated by violent revolution. They felt that
Mm.
that was what they had to do in order to be heard politically. And is violent revolution something that's a requirement in Marxism, or is that just kind of something that um, they themselves came to to feel that that was what they had to do?
No, no, I wouldn't say that's an inherent aspect of Marxism because there are different types of Marxists, and I don't think that like right wingers say that Marx advocated for violent revolution, but he never actually advocated for any sort of revolution, or especially not a violent revolution. It was other types of radical communists and Marxists that went overboard with Marxist philosophy, like Stalinists and Maoists, like we were talking about, which used Marxist philosophy and communism to justify mass genocide and violent revolution and that sort of stuff. I mean, I guess if you go back to the Russian Revolution closer to when Marx was actually alive, like Trotsky, who was Trotsky was more radical too, and I think he was more of the reason that there was the violent Russian Revolution. I think it was during the First World War.
Yeah, one of the things I thought that was interesting is that in the earlier farming campaigns, that there was a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot of public support, but there was definitely some support from the left that wasn't, that I was surprised by, you know, like, so they were, sounded like they had politicians that were like actually supporting them. So I thought that
Yeah,
was interesting.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
And
Yeah,
there
it
was
was
some
more.
interesting things just kind of regarding that. It felt like there was more support amongst young people because they called their whatever they were doing political actions. And it seemed like younger people back then would be like, had more of the attitude that they would have like a middle finger to the man or whatever. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
there's kind of a cultural differently. It was a cultural difference there where we had the counter. They're just coming out of the counterculture. So it's almost as if this stuff was acceptable. And if we have to remember, like right in the beginning of the book, Vietnam was still active. So there was a lot of animosity among young people. And if you remember, a lot of the more angry or elements of these radicals were people who had returned from Vietnam.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's interesting because it makes sense that, like a lot of veterans tend to become anti-war because they become disillusioned with war. And then, it would make sense that if you get more radical, you could get mad at the government for tricking you into going to war. And you could see how that could build sympathy for radical, revolutionary, violent left-wing groups.
Well, even then, if we're talking about Vietnam, um, since there was a draft, some people had no choice. So it's not even as if they were tricked. They know it was shitty to go to war. But outside of draft dodging, they had no choice. Because in order to dodge the draft, you had to basically flee the country.
Yeah,
Or it's either you flee the country or you go to jail. Those were kind of your options.
yeah, exactly.
Or you make yourself medically ineligible. I don't know what kind of extremes people would go to, like to make themselves medically ineligible. Like, I wonder if people, I'm wondering if people would shoot themselves and give themselves a debilitating injury that would stop them from being shipped off to Vietnam.
I bet some
Like
people
in
probably did that.
hindsight, I think in hindsight, if I knew that was gonna happen, I'd probably grab a fucking gun and shoot myself in the knee. Like,
Yeah, yeah, I might do something like that too.
yeah, I would not want to go to fucking Vietnam, man. In hindsight, that shit was just like seemed horrendous. But if I was drafted to go to Iraq, at least there was a high chance of me coming back alive. But man, Vietnam, a lot of U.S. soldiers died in that war, if I'm not mistaken. It was pretty brutal.
Yeah,
And that, and like a lot of people who came back from Vietnam came back crazy.
yeah.
So there's that
Well,
too.
understandable, right? And war
Yeah,
tends to give people PTSD, of course.
right. So one of the things I thought that was really, really interesting about the end of the book, because we have some statements about from like the major radical figures like Bill Ayers and Dorn and some of the others. Um, LeSueur, I think one of his names is the guy that got caught in the end. A lot of them say that what they did wasn't effective because they were not able to reach the masses with what they were doing. Um, and it sounds like a lot of them regretted the way they went about doing things.
Yeah,
Because they didn't have the people on their side. Nobody wanted, like the vast majority of people didn't want violent revolution. Like
yeah, of course.
there were some sympathies. Like, yeah, we sympathize that, you know, black people are being treated poorly, um, and other things like that. I think, and then corporations are screwing people, et cetera, et cetera. But people were not into that violent revolution stuff. And um, we saw towards like the middle and end of the book that they were losing a lot of support
Hmm.
for what they were doing. Um, so in the end, it looks like they kind of saw that what they did was not the right way to affect change because they didn't
Yeah.
really affect any change.
No. It kind of reminds
They made the
me
FBI better at their job, basically.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. It kind of reminds me of how in that new Batman movie with Robert Pattinson, at the end, he realizes that you can't actually stop the crime problem in Gotham by punching criminals in the face. In a similar
Yeah,
way, you can't necessarily stop black oppression by killing a lot of cops and bombing people and stuff like that.
yeah. So, what do you think? Like, this is an interesting book because it makes me think about political action today and how the script has flipped. So it's not the left propagating these violent acts, but it's the right. But
Hmm.
it seems like the right doesn't have as much organization that the left did in these years. Because it seems like they had all these um, avenues of funding themselves, whereas in the right, it's mostly lone nuts that are doing these terroristic actions.
Yeah, I guess the only groups that you could talk about are like
Is the Proud
QAnon.
Boys.
Yeah, like QAnon and the Proud Boys that were part of storming the Capitol last year. Um,
And the three percenters and those
yeah,
guys.
but they're like, it seems like they're a much well, like you were saying, kind of, they're a much smaller and less organized fringe group than all of these left-wing groups like the Black Panthers, the BLA, the Weathermen, et cetera, were in the 70s.
Well, as far as terrorism goes, yes. I say you never hear about the Proud Boys knocking over banks to fund their organization.
Yeah, yeah, the QAnon people haven't done that either, and obviously the right-wing groups are more likely to support cops, so they're less likely to advocate for killing cops.
Right. So it seems like on the right side of things, these groups that do end up committing terrorist attacks, and it's not as much like, yeah, it's some lone nuts that go out there and kill people, but it sounds like it's not as much as what was going on in the 70s. Like a shitload of cops got killed, lots of people got blown up by bombs. Um, and there was this one quote I remember in the book, like if you heard that a bomb went off in San Francisco, that was like normal. Like that wasn't surprising at all for anyone to read in the newspaper that a bomb
Hmm.
had went off. Um, which is kind of nuts because that would be so sensationalized today. Any type of like, even if the bomb didn't go off and it was just found. Like I remember those, what was it, those bombs that were mailed out to people by the Trump supporter. They're like mailed out to like some CNN people and
Yeah, yeah,
some other folks.
and there was some mailed to some right-wing Fox hosts too, weren't there? Like Tucker Carlson and people like that.
I'm not sure if it was Tucker Carlson, but I think I remember someone on the right receiving one of these from some crazy ass Trump supporter. But yeah, it seems like they were organized. They had meetings, they had safe houses, they had false identities and shit like that. It was pretty nuts, but also shows that because of today's technology, that is much more extremely difficult to pull off. Like it's not as easy, I don't think, to go underground, like these folks did with all the surveillance that's around. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was definitely an interesting part of the book.
Yeah, I'd love to see like a documentary of this book. It's really fascinating. I think the most fascinating part of it is like that we don't hear about this stuff. And it's
Yeah,
interesting that what the left was capable of in the United States and what they did on US soil.
definitely.
Were there any groups similar to these that were in Canada or like any local homegrown terrorist like left-wing groups that may have done bombing similar to the
Well,
Weathermen and the BLA?
well, in the I think I talked before when we were talking about how Justin Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act against those Freedom Convoy truckers that I clarified in a second video because the Canadian Supreme Court is investigating him for that now that it his his dad, the first Trudeau in the 70s, invoked a not the Emergencies Act, but a similar act giving him sort of authoritarian powers because there literally was this Quebec separatist violent terrorist group called the FLQ, and they kidnapped politicians and took them for ransom and tried to kill them. So that's the only sort of similar thing I can think of, although it definitely wouldn't surprise me if there was more similar stuff like that in Canadian history, but that's the only example I can think of off the top of my head.
Were the FLQ, were they on the right side of the spectrum or left side of the spectrum?
The Quebec separatists tend to be on the right side of the spectrum.
Okay, so
Yeah.
they were a right-wing group.
There's still Quebec separatists today, but they never get enough support to actually separate from Canada. Kind of like how people in Texas have talked about from separating from the U.S. for a long time.
Yeah, it tends to not get much support.
Yeah.
There's always a bill in California there's like a part of California that wants to split off from the state.
Mm-hmm.
Something similar to that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what are your overall thoughts on this Days of Rage book?
I'm glad that you recommended it. I thought that it was really interesting and educational. Like I said, I had kind of an inkling of this bit of history, but I had no idea. Like I've heard of the Black Panthers before, and I knew that there was some left wing revolutionary violence in the U.S. in somewhere around the 70s, but I had no idea the extent to which there were these types of groups and the extent of violence that they carried out, like the sheer number of bombings and cop killings and bank robberies and all that kind of stuff. And there was some surprising information in there too, like how we were talking about how they broke Timothy Leary out of prison and those little other interesting tidbits of information. It's a really good book overall.
Well, one thing I thought that they might have touched on that they did not, which I thought was particularly important, which was why all of these violent revolutionary groups and why did they start and what was kind of the impetus for some of these. I know the Weathermen and the SDS, they started because of the Kent massacre. Have you heard of that event?
No.
The Kent massacre is when there was a demonstration at Kent State college or university. It was a student demonstration, basically a protest. And in order to squash the protest, the National Guard showed up
Oh, wow.
and they actually killed 4 students.
Oh, okay.
So that's an event that kind of sparked a lot of this violent revolution stuff.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Right? 'Cause
there can be justifiable reasons that people become radical revolutionaries, but then they go way overboard, of course, with their reaction.
yeah. So it was 28 National Guard soldiers fired 67 rounds over a period of 13 seconds, killing 4 students and
Wow.
wounding 9 others. Some of the 9 others who survived suffered permanent paralysis, or at least one of them did.
Right. Okay.
And this is nuts. Like, this is one of those things that is kind of like a stain on American history that you don't really, doesn't really come up much.
Yeah.
And I believe remember the guy I was talking about that was part of SDS?
Yeah.
Yeah, he went to Kent State.
Oh, okay.
So I believe he was a student there when it happened.
Okay.
So yeah, so it was an event. It was an SDS event. It was a protest. They were protesting the um, the war in Cambodia, which was kind of like the precursor to Vietnam.
Okay.
And yeah, they showed up. It was there were 500 students there, and there was kind of a riot that happened the day before, where people were in the downtown area. I'm guessing this is a college town, so they went to the downtown area, and there was rioting in which storefronts were broken, and typical rioting behavior. So police arrived there and they dispersed the crowd. And then days later, they were at this college campus protesting, and they were ordered to disperse by Ohio National Guard units. And when they didn't do so, that's when they started firing tear gas. And the tear gas was actually made ineffective because the wind was blowing opposite to the tear gas. So the tear gas didn't even get to the protesters.
Right.
So they basically, since they failed to disperse this crowd, they were ordered to advance on the crowd with their weapons locked and loaded. And they weren't carrying like M16s and shit. They had handguns and M1 rifles, which are like M1s they used in World War II. These are not like
Oh,
us.
yeah. I remember that. I remember that from one or a few of the Call of Duty games.
Yeah, it's
M1
basically,
Garand.
yeah, the M1 when it's out of bullets, it makes this ping sound.
Right.
When the clip is empty, and the clip isn't really a clip; it's just like a string of bullets like attached to each other. But anyway, they advanced on the crowd. The tear gas wasn't working. They fired some more tear gas. And then that's when the protesters started throwing stones at the guards, um, which they believe some of them brought stones with them to anticipate a confrontation. So they retreated up to over a hill. They were still confronting the National Guard. And some guardsmen claimed to have been struck with rocks, and after reaching the top of a hill, the guard fired at the protesters because the guard was actually retreating and they were being followed by the protesters. I guess they felt in danger or something and they opened fire. None of these people had guns, mind you. They were just students, some of them with rocks.
Right.
So yeah, they gunned down protesters. 29 out of the 77 guardsmen there claimed to have fired their weapons. And yeah, it's just crazy to hear about protesters being shot at by real bullets.
Yeah, that's another thing that it seemed like it happened a lot in the 60s and 70s, that cops would really violently shut down protests, and it led to all sorts of super violent riots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's like some bullshit. I swear, because there's some quotes here by some of the guards. One of them says, "The sky was black with stone."
That sounds like a fantasy book quote.
Yeah,
or like in 300 when they say the arrows will blot out the sun.
Yeah, they said that they believed their lives were in danger. But most of the guardsmen said they fired because they heard other fire, so they assumed that they were being fired upon.
Right.
So whoever shot first, kind of created a cascade where the other guards thought they were justified in firing because there was somebody else had fired.
Right.
They also believe that the claim that the guardsmen feared for their lives was a fabrication created after that event.
Oh, they did?
Well, because most of the guardsmen didn't fire. Seems like only a quarter of them, a little over a quarter of them fired on these protesters.
Right.
So I don't know. If you go to Kent State today, I think there's still a memorial for those who died during that protest.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's an infamous one. I had definitely heard of that before.
Yeah, so this happened in 1970, May the 4th, 52 years ago.
Star Wars Day before Star Wars existed.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I thought this was an interesting book, interesting look into history and political violence from an era which I wasn't really alive.
Yeah, me neither.
But I caught the tail end of, because I know some of the bombings did happen up until like 84. That's when I was alive, but I was very young.
Right.
But I remember at this time, like in the early 80s when I was growing up, nobody talked about the Vietnam War. Like the Vietnam War wasn't on our history curriculum. Like even when I graduated high school, the Vietnam War wasn't in my history curriculum.
Oh, really?
I don't know which. Yeah, it wasn't. Like you would probably, we had history up until World War II, but post World War II, there was like no history curriculum.
That's weird.
Past that. Yeah.
You went to school in the 80s or so?
I graduated in 1999.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds about right, because you're about 8 years older than me, and I graduated from high school in 2008.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of history do they teach in Canada, like as far as like wars and stuff go.
Like,
I'm pretty sure you guys talked about WW2.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I seem to remember learning about the Vietnam War and stuff too, but then of course we focused on more Canadian history too. Like there
Mhm.
was I don't remember I probably don't remember most of what I learned in school because I hated school when I was a kid and I didn't like learning until I became an adult, but I remember learning about some of the conflicts between early Canadian Europeans and Native people, but nowhere
Mhm.
near to the extent that I've learned about it today from reading books about that. And then I remember learning about the War of 1812, for example. I remember that being surprising because it's the only war when Canada beat the US and literally burned down the White House. And yeah, like I said, I mean, I think I seem to remember learning a little bit about the Vietnam War in school, but and you know, I think we learned about the American Civil War because I knew what slavery was, and I knew that that war was fought over that. Just kind of like the basics in World War One and World War Two, I guess. You don't go into that much detail about it in elementary school and high school.
No, no, like a Dan Carlin podcast goes in much more depth than anything you'd get in high school.
especially especially as multi-part series. Like there's nothing more educational about the Mongols than his Wrath of the Khan series, and there's nothing more educational about World War One than his series on it, which I'm forgetting the name. Oh, is it
Yeah,
Blueprint for Armageddon? I think that's what the
yeah,
World War One series
that
is
was my
called.
favorite series. It was that
Yeah,
one plus like the one where the crazy cultists took over a city. That
yeah.
was also good.
I think I think my favorite Dan Carlin episode is the standalone episode he did called Prophets of Doom, which
Yeah,
was
that's the one
about
I'm talking about.
yeah, I love that one about the kind of basically Christian civil war in a small German town in the 1500s between the Anabaptists and other Protestants because the Protestants were not radical enough for the Anabaptists, and there was all this stuff about like religious cult leaders stealing everyone's wives, and then one gets tortured and takes his place, and the guards got so drunk preparing for war that they confused the sunset with the sunrise, so they attacked in the dead of night all drunk and disoriented. There's so much interesting stuff in that episode.
hmm hmm But yeah, it's almost like a forgotten part of history. I was aware of some of it because of that person that I met. Not to this extent, though. So I really enjoyed getting into that and learning more about these left-wing revolutionary groups because you just never hear much about them. I guess you do hear about the Black Panthers. They're probably out of all of these groups, the ones that are talked about the most and are the most
Mhm.
recognized.
Yeah, I
But
think that's the only group in the book that I had heard of before.
yeah, because I've heard of the Weather Underground and SCS, but I didn't know the extent of their activities. The Black Panthers are obviously famous, because of how they got gun laws to change in California.
Oh, I didn't
And
know that.
yeah, because once they stormed the state capitol, California outlawed open carry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because of the Black Panthers.
Okay.
um, yeah, so I knew about the Black Panthers and everything, but these other groups like the Symbionese Liberation Army and the BLA and the radical like Puerto Rican group, and then like these super small splinter groups um, that were just comprised of like a few families and stuff. Yeah, I didn't know anything about these groups, and I thought it was really interesting to hear different perspectives because the guy that wrote this book, he definitely did his research.
Yeah.
Um, it sounds like he spoke to a lot of people who remained anonymous, obviously. There were a lot of people who remained anonymously that talked to him about some of the things that happened. And uh, but yeah, this book is really interesting. I'm just glad I had this book on my to read list for a while. But this was like before I got my super library card.
Right.
And I completely forgot about it. I was like, let me search these other libraries to see um, if I could find it. And I forgot how this book like was mentioned to me. I think I was listening to a podcast where somebody had mentioned that there was a lot of um, political left-wing political violence in the 70s. Like, huh, I gotta find out more about this. But yeah, the book is called Days of Rage. The author is Brian Burrow, and this book was when was this published? This book was published in 2016, so it's not that old. So I will highly recommend it. It's not a boring history book. It's a lot of shootouts and prison breaks and a bunch of other crazy stuff. I'd say it's not like have you I remember did you read the book called shoot, what was it called? I uploaded it. Death to All Puerto Ricans or something like that.
Yeah, I read that a while ago when you sent it to me.
Yeah, it's not as entertaining as that book because it seems like Death to All Puerto Ricans was like an action movie. The way the
Yeah,
guy wrote it.
yeah, that was a really fascinating book.
But yeah, it's very similar. Like if you really like actiony history books that describe shootouts and stuff like that, and bank robberies, and that really get into it, this is the book for you.
Yeah.
And if you want to learn more about like these revolutionary types, the book is called War Against All Puerto Ricans, and there's a similar. It's basically a similar book, but it's about terrorism in Puerto Rico and how there are conflicts between the government and Puerto Rican revolutionaries.
Yeah, and how the American government
Oh,
and
they
the
definitely did a
FBI,
massacre there in
yeah,
Puerto
they did a
Rico.
mass genocide and took over their country. Yeah.
Yeah, there was basically Puerto Rico is the only U.S. soil that we've actually done an air raid on.
Right.
So there were actual bombs that fell from planes that fell on, at the time, American citizens. Those Puerto Ricans are considered American citizens.
Yeah. I know a lot of libertarians move to or love Puerto Rico because they have no taxes there, or no state taxes, I guess.
Well, there's no federal taxes, but there's still taxes from the Puerto Rican government.
Oh, other way around. Okay.
Yeah, you still got to pay like local taxes.
Okay.
You still have to pay like the big federal taxes. And local taxes aren't as expensive as federal because we're all double dipping here. So we have to pay state taxes, and then we pay local taxes, municipal taxes, which is from our city, our county. Then we have state taxes, which are from our state, and then we have federal taxes, which is from the IRS.
Okay.
So we
Yeah,
get three levels of taxing here.
I think it's similar here in Canada, except I think it's more like two levels of taxation. There's federal taxes, and then there are or are not provincial taxes as well, depending on what province you're in. In here in Alberta, there's no provincial tax, but in other provinces like Ontario and BC, there's also a provincial tax on top of the federal tax.
Okay, so you guys have something similar. The province is basically like the Canadian version of a state. Um,
Oh,
so,
apparently Alberta is the only province that doesn't have a provincial sales tax, actually. I forgot about that.
oh, nice. Nice. You don't have a provincial sales.
Yeah.
Yeah, our sales tax are based on local sales tax. So we'll have a local sales tax plus a state sales tax. Well, it depends. Some states don't have sales tax, like Delaware doesn't have any. But yeah, it
Okay.
really depends on which state you live in.
Okay. So, Port, why did I must be forgetting why it is that libertarians love Puerto Rico for the lack of
No
taxes.
federal, no federal
No
taxes.
federal? Okay.
No federal, no. So yeah, how many stars you giving this one?
Uh, I think I gave it 3 stars because, like I said, it was a really interesting book, but it wasn't as exciting as something like The War for All Puerto Ricans, like you said. But yeah,
Yeah,
I definitely recommend it to people. It's very educational about this aspect of American history.
right, right. I don't even think I rated it yet, but I was really, it really was informative for me. So if I were to give it a rating, it would be like 3.5, 3.75.
Yeah, I'd probably give it around a 3.5 if I could on Goodreads too.
Yeah, since I'm going to round it up on Goodreads, I'm just going to give it a 4 on Goodreads. I tend to round stuff up instead of down.
I think I
Well,
tend to round down.
I round down if it's bad, and I round up if it's good. Like
That makes sense.
if something is like 2.5, I'll give it a 2. Something is like 3.5, I'm more apt to give it a 4 than a
Oh,
3.
okay. So if it's a lower rating, like below
I'll round
3,
down.
then you'll round down. But if it's above 3, then you'll round up.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So to me, 3 is like 0. It's like the even ground.
Okay.
So anything above that is good. Anything below that is like, eh.
That's fair.
Um, so yeah, all right. So what kind of media you consume this week?
Yeah, other than this book, oh, I recently finished Anathem that I was telling you about.
Ah,
And
isn't that a
yeah,
crazy ending?
yeah, it is a crazy ending. I like the ending, and I like how the I like the like everything that leads up to the ending. And like I was
Hmm.
telling you, it's really it seems like a really super slow moving plot, especially at the beginning of it, and it's a super long book, but it was confusing with all of these made up words because it takes place like I think it's like 3,000 years in the future, something like that, or
Hmm.
3,600 years maybe.
Hmm.
And so it was hard to figure out like what the fuck was going on at first, but it kind of got a little more clear gradually, more and more as the book progressed, and it kept my interest enough that I wanted to know what was happening. So yeah, I thought it was a decent book overall. I think I gave it 3 stars. I think you liked it more than me, right?
Yeah, I really like the book. I love the world building in the book. I love the twist with the space travelers. I really liked the ending where they're kind of going up because there's an assassination that happens, and then they go up and up to this spaceship, and then there's like this warrior monk society that goes with them who are like super martial artists.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
cool.
they like beat the crap out of some of these people. But then there's like this weird kind of temporal and universe, like what do you want to call it? Like like extra dimensional stuff that happens.
It's kind of like a multiverse.
Yeah, there's like multiverse stuff that happens at the end of the book, and it has something to do with like a scientific discovery that the main character makes along with his mentor professor, and they engage in that. So it's like I got to read this book again because the ending is so weird, but it's also good.
Yeah, for sure.
And like I said, I
Yeah.
just really like the world building of this book. I know there's a
Yeah.
lot of annoying like terms and glossary that you got to know, but I think
Yeah.
that's kind
Yeah.
of interesting part of like the world building itself, that they have
Hmm.
all these terms for different analogous things that we have in our society.
Hmm.
But it's funny because do you remember how they described like people in the secular world how they dress?
Oh, like people, you have a bolt and I forget the other two things, but that was like standard dress, and it seemed to mean some sort of cloak maybe, and I forget
Oh
what the
yeah,
other.
yeah, for the Mathic people. Yeah, they have like
Yeah, yeah, for the.
this
Mhm.
cloak thing and a sphere that floats and changes sizes, and they
Yeah,
can manipulate that. But the way that the regular people dress, they basically just wear like sports jerseys and shit. It's almost
yeah,
like the regular world is very close to idiocracy in a way, like the way that
yeah,
they dress and stuff. I thought that was kind of funny.
yeah, and it's interesting that there are these, like we were talking about before, kind of cloistered societies of academics who live in a totally segregated, separate way from the rest of society.
Yeah, and some of these, depending on which, I guess you want to call it kind of like the analogy, it would be like an Aja, I guess. Some Ajas like open their doors to the public like once a year, and there are other Ajas that open their doors to the public like once every 1,000 years.
Yeah, and then once every 10 years, once every 100.
Yeah, so I thought that was pretty interesting.
Hmm. And
Yeah, I want to revisit
there's.
that book again sometime because I thought I know it's the plot is so slow, and they do a lot of kind of philosophical conversations about like logic and stuff like that. But even then, I still thought it was like really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I just would have liked the plot to be a little
So quicker.
quicker, but and
I
and
think it
and
picks up. It picks up basically once he leaves his what do they call it? I can't remember the
oh,
name. They like the college thing.
his math.
Yeah, once he gets kicked out, because I know they kind of get kicked out. Um, once he leaves, that's when the story and plot kind of really picks up. But he's
Hmm.
in that place for more, I think, like half the book or longer.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. A large portion of it for sure.
Yeah, because they're looking for one of the frauds, I think.
Yeah,
They're trying to find him.
the main character, I think his name is Fra
Erasmus.
Erasmus, and he's looking for Fra Arolo. And then there's a part where he kind of finds his dead body, and then he gets reanimated, but then he gets killed again by a volcanic eruption caused by the aliens dropping this thing that's not like a nuclear warhead, but it causes the volcano to explode.
Yeah, and then you have there's also like a love interest, and they have liaisons, like different liaisons.
Right.
I went really deep into the glossary. The glossary is really interesting. like when you get into it.
Oh, okay.
But it helps like explain a lot of stuff just by looking at definitions of words.
Right. Yeah, and they have throughout the regular book too sprinkled in definitions to help you understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm. All
I
right.
also
Was there anything else you read?
Yeah, yesterday I started reading a biography of AC/DC.
Oh, okay.
What's it called? What's it called again? I think it's called Maximum Rock and Roll. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's I'm kind of learning about it's called Maximum Rock and Roll. I'm learning about basically the history of how AC/DC was formed and how they rose to fame, and the difficulties they had with Bon Scott's death, and how he was in other bands before he joined AC/DC, and the Young brothers, Angus Young and Malcolm Young, were in a bunch of other bands before AC/DC was formed too, and how they always had this like, we're gonna play some awesome rock music and have fun, fuck you if you don't like it attitude. And the whole aspect of Brian Johnson replacing Bon Scott as singer after Bon Scott died. And yeah, it's pretty interesting overall, I would say.
Sounds cool. The only thing I know about AC/DC, because I didn't really listen to any of their music, but I know that Artie Lang was a very big fan of AC/DC.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, huge fan. He was, or
Okay.
is. He's still alive, so he's still a big fan. Because Artie
Okay.
Lang has a lot of problems that haunt him. Lots of
Okay.
demons that he has to fight off.
Okay. So I think the last time we talked, I was telling you about that shorter Bernie Sanders book that I read, Bernie Sanders' Guide to Political Revolution, which I didn't like as much as his other one that I read because it was fairly basic and just kind of an outline of his political philosophy, and the other one went into more detail about his policies and I guess more detail about his worldview too. I also did the other day read one of those Halo books that you sent me, Halo Silentium, which is one of the multiple different Halo series. I think this is book 3 in the Forerunners saga, so it's like basically a prequel to the entire Halo universe. It's even a prequel to the Covenant themselves, because if you remember from the games, the Forerunners are the people who kind of created a whole bunch of artifacts before the Covenant existed, and then they were wiped out by the flood before the Covenant even existed, if I remember correctly. So that one was pretty interesting.
Yeah, they built the Halo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I guess I know you don't have that much time left, so I think those are the only ones that are kind of notable that I've read recently.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, and I'll finish Winter's Heart by next weekend too.
Yeah, that final chapter is quite good.
Yeah, I saw Tristram saying that the ending was the reason that Winter's Heart was his favorite book for a while. I think like probably beyond book 3 for the most part. There's just so much stuff that happens in all of the Wheel of Time books that I forgot most of what happens in the details of it beyond book 3. So I don't even remember the ending of Winter's Heart. So that'll be fun to experience again.
Yeah, I didn't remember either until I reread it. So, like, I'm similar to you, except I can remember pretty much up to book 6, book by book. It starts for me to get hazy by book 7.
Okay.
But book 7, I think I know pretty well now. Book 8, I I think I know book 8 well now
Okay.
because I
Yeah, I
reread it
think
recently.
it's interesting. I was just thinking, I kind of remember the events in the first three for the most part, and then I don't really that much for book 4 or 5, but I remember the events in book 6 better because that's one of my favorite ones. I still kind of like the first three the most. Maybe the Dragon Reborn, the third one, would be my favorite in the series. Still, so far in my reread, at least. But book 6 is probably my favorite one after book 3, and I remember a lot of the events in that one from my reread this time.
Well, usually I just remember them by overall themes. So, book 4 is Rand in the Waste.
Right.
Book 5 is Rand returning from the waste to the wetlands and Moraine dying. Book
Or
6 is
dying.
yeah. Book 6 is Demise Wells.
Yes.
Um,
That's a very awesome ending. That's good, easy to remember.
mhm. Book 7 is Rand's campaign against the Shan, or is that book 8? See, that's when I start to get fuzzy. Um, oh no, book 7 is like him killing Samael, I guess.
Oh yeah,
Book,
that happens at the end, right?
yeah. Book 8 is, I call it the war against the Shan. That's when Rand picks up Kalendor and fucks up his own army. That's the most notable part of the book to me. I can't even remember the end. Oh yeah, that's when the attempted assassination. Um,
Oh right,
but the
right.
but the most notable part of the book for me is when he kills his own people when he picks
Hmm.
up Kalendor.
Yeah,
I remember book 8 so far is my least favorite
yeah.
out of
That's
all of them.
one of the most sloggy ones in the start of the slog so far, I would
Yeah,
say.
and this book 9, I didn't really feel like a slog to me. Like there was a
Yeah,
lot of
that
interesting stuff going on.
yeah. There's some interesting stuff happening in there for sure. Yeah,
Yeah, because there's a
pretty
lot of sexual
pretty.
stuff that happens.
Yeah,
Sexual stuff without being explicit.
pretty build
Um,
like major significant events too. Like I think I missed I did miss the episode where you and Tristan were talking about the kind of middle third of it or so, and that's when uh that's when Elaine, Avienda, and Min, all three of them bond themselves to Rand, and Matt is being chased by the golem, and
mhm.
I forget there are at least a few other pretty significant things that happen just in that part of the book.
Well, I
Um,
know there's because
oh
we only have
yeah.
Perrin's wife being kidnapped and stuff like that.
Oh right, yeah, that's in that book. I was wondering if that was in that book or the previous one.
That's in this book.
Okay.
Um, so that's when
Vail
it
gets
happens.
kidnapped and he's looking for her. Right.
Yeah, she gets kidnapped at the very end of the last book, but her capture gets played out mostly in this book.
Okay.
But yeah, I
But
like this book. I think
yeah,
it's
it's
pretty
good.
good. Like the ending's really good. Nynaeve is becoming a much more likable character in this book. Because I know
Yeah.
Nynaeve is kind of like gets on her nerves in the earlier books,
Yeah,
but in
especially
this
the
book
earlier
is
books.
like when she's actually a really cool ass character.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Um, Especially the last chapter of that book. But
Yeah.
yeah, I can't wait till you get through it and then we can talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, that'll be
Uh,
fun.
because I just finished reading that recently. Um, what else I've been reading? Well, yeah, I finished Days of Rage. Of course, I've been reading Ambergris, collection of
Oh,
short stories.
I saw that in the audiobooks that you have sent me, but I haven't read it yet. It's a collection of short stories by Jeff Vandermeer. I thought it was like a trilogy of books. It's a collection of short stories.
Well, there are short stories and books, like book length books, but they're not. I don't think the books are actually related, like
Okay.
different characters and shit. It's okay. Like I wouldn't recommend it to like a fantasy person that likes like mainstream fantasy stuff. If you want to hear weird shit about mushrooms and I don't know, it seems like Jeff Vandermeer is obsessed with mushrooms,
Maybe he
especially in
writes a
this
lot of
series.
shit on mushrooms because a lot of his stuff is super weird.
Yeah, there's a lot of super weird stuff here too,
Okay.
but it's not as good as what we're used to. I just don't think he's
Yeah.
that great with fantasy. The
Yeah,
sci-fi stuff
his
is amazing.
yeah, definitely. His Southern Reach slash Area X trilogy that starts with Annihilation are definitely my favorite.
Yeah, I love that stuff. Um, I just also finished an anime called Seven Seeds. It's on Netflix,
Okay. Oh, I
and
haven't heard of that one.
because it was canceled, so they're not even going to finish the story. I
Oh,
went ahead and started reading the source material, which is a manga series.
hmm.
And so far, I've read 4 volumes of it so far. I
Okay.
think there's like 35 volumes.
Oh, okay.
And
Oh,
each
that
volume
reminds me. You know how
has its,
the Castlevania show on Netflix is done? We finished that one.
yeah,
There's apparently I think I saw that there I didn't watch it, but I think I saw that there's an ad for another Castlevania anime series that they're going to be starting.
I have not seen that ad yet, but I will have to go look for it. I knew they were
Mm,
doing another season with like new casts, but I didn't know when they were doing it. And
okay.
I didn't know who was going to be the subject of the new cast. But I'll definitely be watching that when it comes out. Man, I'm
Yeah, that
behind.
should
I
be
haven't
pretty
even
cool.
not even caught up with Stranger Things. I haven't even started it yet.
Yeah, I haven't started season 4 yet either. I just recently finished season 4 of Ozark, which I didn't realize until after I finished it is actually the series finale, and holy shit, that's a fucking intense ending to the series.
All right, man, I gotta finish that too. Gotta finish The Expanse. A lot of shit I gotta finish.
Me too.
Um,
I think I'm watching season 6 of Expanse right now.
yeah, I'm like on the tail end of season 4 of Expanse. Ugh,
Oh,
so much stuff to get through.
yeah,
Fuck.
2 days ago,
Had
2 days sorry?
I wish Prime had the 1.5 speed up.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah.
Netflix has it.
Yeah. Yeah, I never watch it at that though because I can't do that on my TV, and I never watch Netflix on my laptop. I probably could if I did that.
Yeah, I watch it on my phone and my tablet, and I can just speed the shit up and get
Okay. Oh
through
yeah, 2 days ago there was a Castlevania Nocturne announcement, like 42-second teaser trailer.
42 seconds.
Yeah.
Not sure. And who could it be about? I don't know. No.
Hey, I could screen share it and play it right now if you want.
You're able to do that as a guest?
Yeah, I think so. I still have the share button here.
Okay.
Yeah, let me do that.
Um, but yeah, Seven Seeds. It's basically a post-apocalyptic series about what
Okay.
happens if a planet is hit by meteors and you set aside groups of people in cryogenic sleep or something, and then they wake up after everything's said and done. And a lot of these people don't even know that they've been set. They didn't know that there's asteroids were coming to hit Earth, and they just kind of wake up and not know what's going on.
Okay. Oh, I guess maybe I can't share this. I think maybe you have to click the screen share that I did and join it to the add it to the chat, or if not, you have to do it. But
Yeah, I don't think I could do that on the phone, fortunately.
yeah, I can just watch it later. I'll watch it later too.
Okay. So yeah, that's the finished Halo.
Which one?
The show.
Oh, the show. Oh, okay. How was it?
There's actually really good action in the end.
Oh, that's good.
Probably the closest you'll ever get to the actual game.
That's good.
Uh,
Yeah, I kind of just forgot about it after I watched episode 5 or so, I think.
okay. And I also finally finished Picard season 1.
House of Cards?
No, Picard.
Oh,
Star Trek
Picard.
Picard.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I haven't seen that, but I think my brother told me it's really cool because it's kind of like grim dark Star Trek, and Jean-Luc
There's
Picard
cursing and
swears
there's
and
blood.
stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, that sounds pretty
cursing and
cool.
blood. I liked it. I thought it was pretty cool. I would recommend it to people. Any fans of the original series. Like I've seen every single episode of the original Star Trek Generation, New Generation.
Next Generation.
Next Generation. Like I've seen every episode of Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager.
Okay.
Like I watched them all completely when they were on Netflix.
Okay.
It took me a while to get through all of those. there's like 8 seasons of original TGS, and each season has like 24 episodes. So you can imagine how long. Well, the first season didn't have 24, but the rest of them had a lot of episodes.
Right.
But yeah, Picard does rely on past series. So there are characters that are from Voyager. There are characters from TGS, or the Next Generation, TNG. I mean, but there weren't any specific characters from Deep Space Nine. I don't think.
Okay.
Even though DS9 is my favorite of the 3 that I completed.
Okay. Yeah, I think my favorite is I definitely haven't watched all of any of the series, but I do want to watch all of the Next Generation because I find that one the most interesting based on what I've watched of it. I like all the kind of philosophical questions that they go into with the science fiction concepts.
Yeah, TNG. Yeah, that's definitely serialized. You can just pick and choose any episode and watch it in any order that you want. It wouldn't really matter. DS9, DS9 made a lot of people upset because when it came out, you actually had to watch it in order because it does have an overarching plot and narrative as opposed to the other two. The other 2 shows like Voyager and TNG. So if you miss like an episode of DS9, you can miss important events that are talked about in the next episode or episodes after that. So,
okay,
I don't know. It's usually people who love TNG and Voyager have bad opinions about DS9, but people who love DS9 think DS9 is the best, but they don't have bad opinions about the other 2. They just don't like them as much as DS9.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I love DS9. It's like a good documentary. I think there's a free documentary about DS9 on YouTube. Like the guy who was the showrunner is definitely an eccentric person. Well, I think they have like a purple beard and shit, and he's like in his 60s.
Oh,
He
okay.
has to be in his 60s by now.
Oh, okay.
Let me see if I can find a picture of him. You won't be able to see him in the stream.
Okay.
DS9 showrunner. I just want to see if I can get his name. Let's see. And some of the cast, his name is Ira Stephen Bear.
Okay.
And he sports a purple goatee, even fucking
Okay.
today. Still has a
Okay.
purple goatee.
That's
I have no
interesting.
why he sports a purple goatee, but he does.
Okay.
I have no clue why he has a purple goatee. But yeah, DS9 is my favorite.
Cool.
Anyway, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. We can go ahead and start wrapping things up. Do you have any plugs that you want to throw out there?
Yep. People should check out my channel, Mindgasms, where actually I was gonna ask you if you would mind sending me this for me to post on my channel too.
What's that?
But could you send me this chat for me to post on my channel too?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so people should check that out. Mindgasms, where yesterday I released a video where I had no idea it would be so popular, which sounded really conspiratorial, which is a clip from a podcast that Dusty and Chris and I did, and where we're talking about findings. And I clarify in the description of the video speculations about Hunter Biden's laptop and child porn and corrupt Ukraine involvement and possible connections to Jeffrey Epstein and shit like that. And also but check out both your video and my video that we did the other day reacting to Jordan Peterson doubling down on his incredibly dumb take, freaking out and literally saying fuck you if you don't like it, and acting like he has an objectively correct opinion about this fat woman being, or slightly fat woman being, on the cover of Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue magazine, and literally calling it authoritarian. So that was entertaining. And yeah, we were supposed to do Taxi Driver this weekend, but because of me, we postponed it again. So look forward to us hopefully finally doing that next weekend too. And I've got more videos coming up about me reacting to people. I think the next one I'm going to do is talking about those people on the Minority Report, Sam Cedar, and those super cringe lefties who literally called Joe Rogan a grifter because he apparently changed his mind on UBI. And I'm also going to continue my book series, and the next one I'm going to do is going to be The Next Rule, on one of Jordan Peterson's rules for life from his new Beyond Order book. So check out all that stuff on Mindgasms.
Great. And our upcoming chats are going to be Winter's Heart. That'll be the final part of book 9 that we're going to talk about, possibly next week, maybe, hopefully.
Yeah.
So that will be our next thing here. Tentatively, if I have a backup plan, which I think we should be able to successfully do this particular podcast, I'll think of something else that we can talk about, which will either be a movie or a book. But for now, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do Winter's Heart. And yeah, I can't wait to jump into that. And everybody, have a great night. Please like and subscribe. Check out my recent video about Jordan Peterson and me doing a quick hot take on that. I might do more things like that in the future. It just depends.
Yeah.
Like I literally, that is like the hottest hot take that I've ever had. Is
Yeah.
I didn't even watch the whole video before I started the hot take on that.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I like
Yeah,
that it
those
was a
sorts
shorter
of
video.
videos are popular and probably get you more subscribers and stuff.
Yeah, so I'll probably do more things like that and more commentary about YouTube stuff and stuff that's happening politically and in the video game world and stuff that I'm interested in, like, just things, hot takes. But
That's a
yeah,
good
check that
idea.
out. And thank you for sticking it out. And join us next week. We're going to talk about the Wheel of Time again with our friend Tristram. And you're going to be there.
Yep.
Try to be there, man. I
Yep.
think you missed the last one, right?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Try to be there, man. It's the finale of this book.
Yep.
All right. So I'll see you guys next week. Have a great night.
Adios until next time, everyone.